thank you for having me here. It's great to talk about logic apps. I love data and everything about data. So hopefully we have a little fun and talk about this as we go along. Just so, Robin, you're able to hear me okay?
Yes.
And everything?
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
All righty. So as I pointed out, my name is Bill Sperling. There's a picture of me there. I'm a solution software architect here for Ellipse Solutions. I've been with Ellipse for a little more than a year. My email there is if you have any follow-ups, anything you want to send me. And I'll present that again at the end. But I've been working with .NET and Microsoft technologies since 2002, 2003, back when it was .NET.1. And I've been working with AX since it was 2009. So I've gone through quite many iterations of AX. So hopefully what I present to you guys will be enjoyable. Again here, I worked with Ellipse now for about a year. Ellipse has been around for about 25 years in the ERP industry. We focus on the Dynamics AX process and technologies for the last 14 years. And we had our first D365 go live back in 2016. This is back when it was still AX7 before they even adapted the D365 name. So we've been working with this now for many years, and we continue to hope to enjoy our time as Microsoft keeps pushing out new versions. We have a little promotion currently going on. If you have any needs for D365 or anything along those lines, we're offering this following promotion. I won't make this a sales pitch or anything like that, but if you have any questions or follow-ups, if we can help in any way, you can always reach out to us at solutions@ellipsesolutions.com. With that being said, here's the agenda I kind of like to go over today, over the next hour or so, kind of covering what exactly is logic apps. I know there's a lot of questions about what that technology is, some of the benefits of using logic apps, some of the concepts, when exactly to try to use logic apps, how exactly does it integrate with Dynamics 365. I have a couple demonstrations lined up to you if time permits, and then obviously we have, like any tool out there, there's a few limitations, costs, and of course there's always alternatives out there. And then, as Robin pointed out, we'll have a question and answer at the end of the session. So I'll get started here. I don't want to bore everybody with repetitive definitions, so I'll try to cover the basics of this and then show the demos. But I think it's important to at least cover some of the basics here so everybody's on the same page. So with that being said, what exactly is Logic App? Logic App is a serverless technology, so it resides as part of the Azure App Server Suite. It is a cloud-based integration platform that you can use a visual designer, which I will show in one of the demos, directly out of the Azure portal. You use it basically to automate most of your business processes and workflows along that lines. With that being said, it is said for serverless, so you do not have to worry about managing virtuals or anything like that. It is primary focus is to connect apps, data, devices, existing applications, new technology, old technology. It is built for that, so that is what it's used for. A lot of misconceptions with it. You could use it for on-premise for your integration. So if you have applications and stuff that reside in-house that you still need to connect to, you can use it. You can connect to those kind of services, and you can also use it, as I pointed out here, for other cloud, larger ecosystems and software as a services connections, including big things like Sales Cloud, Salesforce, and Dynamics 365 and Office 365 and all those kind of things. The idea of logic apps is to simplify how you design and build your scalable solutions. You do not want to, apologies there, a lot of work goes into building in-house solutions to try to get everything to communicate together. The point of logic apps is to try to build those systems so you can scale them out and then build your workflows so everything communicate together in a much simpler design without using code and writing repetitive code over and over again. One of the biggest benefits is developers can use the integration workloads and use REST and JSON practices and remove some of those dependencies on existing bulky message brokers, which absolutely can really make your process a lot more scalable. One thing to keep in mind though is Azure Logic App is not Microsoft Power Automate, which was just recently rebranded from Microsoft Flow. Those are two separate tools, so we're just going to focus on Logic Apps here, but you will notice, if anybody has any experience with this, a lot of the things that we can do with Logic Apps, you can also do with Power Automate as well. But I just want to point that out, that these are two separate tools. Power Automate, assuming everything is still the same with it, is built as a layer on top of Microsoft Logic Apps. So, but they are two separate tools. Here are some of the benefits of using Logic Apps. Again, I mean, I kind of hinted on some of these already. You can visually create your business process and workflows, so you can easily have it mapped out. So when we get into the demo, you can easily see the flow of the Logic Apps. You know, what happens in this condition, what happens in that condition. It allows you to, you have a wide range of integrations. So basically, Logic Apps allows you to consolidate websites, mobile apps, and business process into a single solution. So it has wide level of integration points. Again, the integrations points are, you know, just using REST and JSON. Logic Apps has well over 300 different connectors with it, and I'll get into those. These connectors allow, you know, basically these connectors allow developers or business managers or whoever's developing these Logic Apps to get data quickly from different sources, update data and systems, and almost real time. I mean, we're talking seconds delay, if even that. And it really depends upon what you're doing within your Logic Apps. You can get real close to real time with your integrations using this one. Organizations can change messages electronically using different protocols and formats. I mean, you're not limited to having your data in one particular format in order to be able to accept the data. You can use Logic Apps to accept data in multiple formats and extract data that you need. So you're opening the data to be able to accept different formats. It can decode inputs, and again, it can decode inputs and receive from various applications, and it could even process those and code the outputs into various formats. So there's nothing stopping you from processing something in a CSV format and processing it into an XML format or whatever you need to do. And again, I'll point out here, you can connect to on-premise data. There's nothing stopping you from retrieving data from different data sources, including your in-house resources. I mean, and that's key. So if you have a legacy system that's running, that's been running since 1985, and for no reason you can get rid of it because there's a, you know, it's vital core to your process. There's nothing stopping you now to use Logic Apps to connect to that data source, to extract that data and use that data in whatever system that you need it for. One of the advantages of Logic Apps, there's no upfront cost of using Logic Apps. You can log in the portal, you can create a Logic App. It doesn't cost you anything to have it sit there. And that's one of the advantages between Logic App and some of the other services within the Azure. If you fire up a virtual It costs you as soon as while it starts running. It costs you for storage. For logic apps, you create it and you get charged when you use it. You don't get charged just having it sit there and do nothing. So that's one of the advantages. There's no upfront setup cost. There's no infrastructure cost behind logic apps. Logic apps also has the ability to scale based on its load. So as you use it, and as you use it and you increase more and more traffic into it, Logic Apps has the ability to scale and automatically scale. So if it detects I need more resources, it will handle that for you. You don't need to sit there and manage that anymore, and that's a huge advantage. So if you have periods of of the year where, let's say, the holiday season, and you have more traffic, Logic Apps can automatically scale and increase that performance for you as you need it, versus other parts of the year where your traffic is lower, then it can descale and only use the resources that it needs. One of the other advantages of Logic Apps is monitoring. You can easily get in there and see how your data is flowing through your Logic app, where there are breakpoints, where something is failing at, where and retrieve that information for you directly within the Logic app. You don't need to sit there and attach expensive debuggers or set up individual processes. You just click on the link and say, why did this fail? And then essentially it brings up the diagram and you can see the failure points directly within that Logic app. With Logic app, it's also easy to experiment with your different workflows. So the advantage of this is anybody that's worked in the IT industry knows that requirements change very frequently and sometimes very fast, and sometimes within 5 minutes. So one of the advantages of this is it gives you ability to experiment. You can clone existing workflows and then you can set those up, and then you can make changes to them pretty much in real time and test them. And then all you got to do is enable it, and then you're essentially alive with your new workflow. So with the advantages of doing something like this, since there's no upfront cost, there's nothing stopping you from cloning it, making adjustments to it pretty much in real time, and then saving your changes and putting that new change into effect immediately versus a whole deployment process. That is a huge ability to do with Logic Apps. And the advantages too is you run into an issue, just delete your workflow. There's zero impact. The system goes back to working as you expected it to. And again, every time I talk about Logic Apps, you write very little code when you use Logic Apps. I'm not saying you're never going to write code. Yeah, you can write custom connectors and all that kind of stuff, but the goal of it is you write very little code for your integration with your Logic Apps, so you can do rapid deployments of some of your business designs. And Logic App also provides tons of predefined templates for your needs. All right, I swear that's kind of the end of the definitions. We'll get into more of the concepts of Logic Apps. On the right side of the screen, you can easily see what I was talking about earlier. This is what a sample workflow looks like. This is just something, it's simple, kind of thrown together, how you can see your data flowing. And here you can see your request. You can easily see, all right, whatever the request is, I'm going to store it on the Azure blob. And then I have some sort of condition. Condition's true, yes. Condition's no, false. Send an email, and then you can also continue on and loop through data as well, as I have a for each down there. This is not a valid workflow, but this is essentially what a workflow is. So this gives you a visual representation of what you're trying to do. So with Logic Apps, with your workflows, this is what a workflow is. A workflow essentially is a series of steps, as you can see here. You start off with your request, you start off with and then you immediately after you get your request, what do you want to do? In this case, in the example I have on the screen, just storing something in the blob. Which brings me to the next bullet, which is connectors. Now, connectors, obviously for a Logic App to work, a Logic App needs data, and that's what your connector is. Each Connectors are used to communicate with your service, whether it's D365, whether it's an in-house, whether it's SQL Server, whether it's whatever it may be. That is your connector. Connectors are used to communicate with the service. Each connector offers a set of operations, such as like an action or a trigger. And the sole purpose of the connector is basically simple as it is, just connect to the application. So I mean, I don't want to over exaggerate that, but that's what a connector does. The connector can also, in some way, shape or form, too, help with managing your authentication. So when you authenticate to that service, it also gives you the prompt to allow you to communicate and authenticate with your service. The next important piece is the triggers. The trigger is basically what starts your logic app. Okay, triggers are what's there to make your logic app as run. It's the listener. If anybody has any experience with Microsoft BizTalk, it's basically the same as your receive location. A trigger is what starts your logic app. So your logic app will start from a trigger. In this case, the example I have, it's your request going down to your blob storage. There are two types of triggers. You got a polling trigger. These are triggers that call your service, say at at some sort of specified frequency, to basically check for new data. When the data is available, it causes to run into the workflow. So in this case, I could set it up to say, go look for this condition on this service, and if this happens, start processing. If you go and look for there's nothing there, then nothing will happen. That's what basically your trigger is doing. You also have your push trigger. Push triggers, these basically listen for data on the endpoint and they wait for the event to occur. So these essentially are going to, these could be like an endpoint. You can have a website endpoint. These tie into D365 using the business events that allow you to communicate into it. They're just going to sit there and wait for something to push data into them. And once they have data, then they will start processing as they go along. For actions, these are events that happen within the logic app itself. So Azure Blob Storage, create a blob, that's an action. So you have a trigger, and then for everything below the trigger, that's essentially an action that is going to be completed. Actions can depend on other actions, but for the most part, in this case, I just have it set up as a simple workflow. You do have the capability of parameters. A lot of the actions and stuff, you can set parameters. So if you want to set it up saying only if this certain condition can meet, you have those kind of parameters. And then each individual action, and even connectors, have output. So if in this case, if you're accepting data and processing it, it'll output the data to the next step. And then when that action takes it over, then you connect to the next step. You can have multiple connectors. You can not just limit it to one. And you can also have multiple triggers too. So, but you're getting into some of the more advanced setups of a logic app. So here again, this slide should be pretty quick. I just included some samples here of some of the common used connectors that are within Dynamics 365. These are the built-in connectors. I know just within the last 2 months alone, 18 connectors have been added that are pretty much widely available to anybody. These are basically built right out of the box, and these are a lot of the common connectors to a lot of the common services that everybody would recognize here. But I can say there are well over 300 connectors, so the sky is pretty much the limit here on what you can do. If you want to be able to take a feed and then post it on Facebook, well, you got the capability to do that. Or post a message on Teams, you can do that. Or send text messages using Twilio. You have all those capabilities to do that stuff. Some of that stuff. Each one of these connectors that you can see here has capabilities, to get the process started for you automatically. And I'll try to show that in a demo where you just drag it over into your workflow, and then it'll start prompting you immediately for what information it needs to connect with it. Obviously, some of my favorites are Dynamics 365, of course. I use those very heavily. You have Power BI, which is very commonly used. Microsoft Teams, and Project Online. A lot of these are very heavily integrated. So those are a lot of your software as a service connectors. You also have your protocol connectors. These are going to be things if you need to connect to FTP, SFTP, email, you want to set endpoints. Those are going to be your protocol connectors. So luckily I did not decide to go through each one of these connections on all the other slides. And then you can also connect to other Azure services when you go through it here as well. So if you have connectors set up and you want to use Logic App and connect to an Azure SQL instance, you can do that one. You can also, as you see, you connect to blob storage. You can connect to all these are common connectors, and then you can also connect to anybody that hybrid connections, where these are other things like SAP, SQL Server, in-house BizTalk server. You can connect to all those systems as well as your common business-to-business XML and EDI connectors as well. I included a link down here at the bottom where you can go to, and it will give you detailed information about all the connections that are available, as well as all the details about those individual connections. So I don't have to sit here and go through 300 slides of each individual connections. When to use Logic Apps? Well, basically, these are the kind of common scenarios where I personally use a lot of Logic Apps, especially when using Dynamics D365. Any communication service, so if I got to communicate OneDrive, business connectors, and those kind of things, I use Logic Apps. If I got to speak to the service bus, again, Logic Apps. Everybody knows that when you export data using the data entities, if you get or inbound data that you need to map over to a data entity from a third-party source, I use it a lot for XML data validation as well. These kind of things help you maintain data consistency, so you can do less coding in, say for an example, Dynamics D365. So if you imported data that's invalid and you need to handle those conditions, you can cut back on your coding or cut back on your failing on your import, and then you can do your XML validation within Logic Apps. So if something were to happen and that file, you determine that file is invalid, you can reject it before it even sends into your system, and either A, send it back to the source saying fix your data, or send it off to a DevOps department that may be able to take a further look at that. And again, this is coming down to data transformations. Basically, if you receive data in one format and you need it to look like a different format, well, Logic Apps is your friend here. You can easily transform your messages from one source to another source. And then anytime I have to connect to an on-premise server, I use Logic Apps for that. It really helps maintain your connections and keep track of your transformations. So basically right now I kind of want to look at the process of, well, how exactly does Logic Apps work with Dynamics D365? And basically, as I pointed out earlier, there's multiple connectors. You have a standard connector and an enterprise connecting. And for the Dynamics 365, working with Logic Apps is a standard connector. And you can easily connect with D365 in multiple ways in Logic Apps. As I kind of pointed out earlier, you can use business events directly in D365. And as that event occurs within D365, D365 can automatically push that data to Logic Apps using the business event, and basically Logic App will sit there as a listener waiting for that event to occur. And when that event does occur, then it will process that data. And if all works well, I do have a demo that kind of shows that. You can also use it as data entities. So let's say, for an example, you have data that receives from source A, and you receive that data off an SFTP. You need to process that, but you need to add additional fields or remove some of that data. You can map it over to a data entity, and then the data entity job can pick it up and then import it into the staging tables, process the data, and then import it into your actual table. A lot of times, if you're doing bulk loading of data, data entities obviously is your friend here in this particular cases. You can also import directly into the data entity using Logic App as well. One of the things you can do with the connector is connect directly into D365. And hopefully, if time permits, I can try to show that as well. The Logic App connector basically covers a lot of the basic setups that you would need to work with D365. And this which you need providing data. It can go out there. It can push data into D365. It can retrieve data, so you can easily set your workflow up to say go and query the D365 database, and by database I don't mean the database directly. I mean the service. It basically covers and works with that authentication and communicates with D365 using a REST and JSON to retrieve that data directly out of D365, and then you can use that data it retrieves to process through your workflow. And you can also receive data, in this case using that business connect, where it will take the data and as that event occurs or whatever it may be, push data to the Logic App. Now remember, you can write your own custom business events within D365. So obviously out of the box of D365, you have a large number of options that you can use to populate data for different events. But obviously you could have a developer construct a new business event within D365 and use that to communicate with the Logic App as well. All these are perfectly valid scenarios that you can do if that event doesn't exist for your needs. But as more and more releases are going along, more and more options and more events are getting added. So and again, I kind of covered most of this already. Integration with D365, most cases it gets used as a trigger. You don't want to sit there and check your data for something to occur. If you want to maintain something in real time and that event occurs, I want you to tell me right away in my Logic App saying this event occurred, and then Logic App will immediately start processing that data. It works as an asynchronous approach. So essentially, when I go in and I process my data, I'm sending that request off to Logic Apps. If somebody else comes by 2 seconds later and processes that same request, that same business event's going to send that new request to the Logic App, and each one's going to get processed independently. You don't have to sit there and wait for the event number 1 to finish before event number 2 is going to finish. And anybody that's worked with some older versions of AX knows that sometimes my session will take longer to save as I wait for some of these additional events that I have to write to complete. That's not the case here. I'm going to save it. The business event's going to get written, and then that business event is going to get set behind the scenes directly to the Logic App, and it uses the batch framework for that. So you don't have to sit there and delay your saving job and locking up your screen that you have with previous versions of AX with D365. Now you're able to immediately save it. The data gets sent behind the scenes asynchronously, and it's sent off, and then the users using it can go about their processes. Again, these are just some of the basic actions within that connection. You can create a new record. You can delete a record. I don't know why anybody would ever do that. You can get a record, again, list records, and you can get obviously a notification when a record is created, updated, or deleted. These are just a lot of the basic functionalities of that particular connector. So here's the fun part. Let's get into getting into some demos here. I tried to set up a demo here. Basically, what we want to do is go into Dynamics 365. We want to look at a trigger. We want to set up the business event. The idea is we want to then set up our workflow basically just to get the record and just send an email. Let's not do anything complicated here. Let's just see how the whole process works together, and let's just send an email. So with that being said, I'll exit out of this. And that brings us over here to Dynamics 365. Now, basically what we want to do here is business events are under your system administration. And then there's a tab here under business events called business events. And here, this lists all your current business events that you currently have in your system. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of business events that are available to you right out of the box. None of these are custom business events. So the case of this demo here, I'm just going to use one of the ones up here at the top. And let's just say I use when a purchase order is confirmed. Sometimes people like to say, I want to confirm a purchase order and I want the vendor or somebody like that to receive an email or something like that when that action happens. Just again, hypothetical, out of the box kind of scenario. So in this particular case, we'll use this one here. A purchase order for when a purchase order is confirmed. Over here, you can see there's schema. You can download your schema. This will basically tell you right out of the box what your JSON string looks like. And I just click that here. And then if I open up the file, you can easily see this is what my JSON schema looks like. It tells you immediately what you're going to be receiving from this business event. And that will come in handy here. So I'll move that over here. And then sorry about that. Let me move that over here as well. All right. So we'll go into our little MSN news for anybody that up to date with the politics or coronavirus. So basically right here, we'll log right into Logic Apps. We'll see here. Now it can take a little bit of time here to sometimes create the Logic app, as you have to wait for it to do it. So in this case, I went ahead and created the Logic app. But if you needed to create a new Logic app, you just go up to Add up here, and then you give it a name, and then what resource group you want it under, and what region, and then you create it. But in this case, in the case of this demo, I went ahead and created a blank Logic app. Here in the Logic app, all of them that start off blank start off this way. This just basically brings up the default designer. You can see there's always a bunch of templates already listed here that you can bridge it off of that you want to use. And then you can obviously search for new ones and have them all broken out in categories. I myself was just going to start off with creating a blank Logic app. So this is basically your Logic app designer. As you can see here, you're using this directly through the UI. You have the capabilities, design parameters. In this case, we're going to start with Dynamics 365. Now there's multiple of them here, but for our case, we're doing finance and operations. So you want to make sure you click with that. And in this case, since we're using our business event, we want to use our business event when that trigger happens. So in this case, remember I said there's actions and there's triggers for each connector. In this case, this connector, we want to trigger it. So we want to set up a trigger that starts our business environment when our business event fires. So in this case, what you do is now we set up our business event. We have to set up our connection. In that case, I apologize, I got quite a bit of connections here. So let me point to my sandbox. And in this case, I got my category. And in this case, remember, it was under accounts payable. So that was this screen here. This is our category. It matches here under accounts payable, which is purchase orders in this case, and our business event, which in this case we want to do when a purchase order is confirmed. And then here we can add a parameter. And let's say in this case, we want to use a parameter when it's only for the US MF legal entity. We don't want to run this for anybody else. We only want to run this for the USMF legal entity. So now we've set up our trigger, and that's really all there is to it. Everything else is handled behind the scenes. So if I came in and said, this is the first time I put it on here for my business event, it would ask me for my connection. And then I would set up a connection, and then it would automatically save that connection, save all the credentials and everything like that you need is already set up. But in this case, my connection's already set up. So in this case, I need to say, all right, my business event has now received the data. What do I need to do with the data? That business event's going to output data into an action. So in this case, I want to parse my my JSON string. So I can easily search for those. I want to parse my JSON string. In this case, the little diagram over here on the right is going to pop up and say, all right, here's my business event occurs. It's going to automatically tell me what object is available to me. So in this case, I'm going to select body. So the output of this data event is called body. So I'm going to take that body and then I'm going to pass it that schema. Well, if you remember earlier, we had that schema, and here it is all formatted nice and pretty that we outputted from that schema on the business event. Here's the data all formatted, and then I can just supply that information into here. So now I've set up my business event. I've told my workflow for my first action, I want to parse my JSON. So then now I said, all right, well, that's easy enough. Now I need to send my data. So now if we want to send an email. So you have multiple options available: email, you have Outlook, you have Office 365. I'm just going to go ahead and use Outlook. And then I want to just go ahead and send an email, which I have here. I don't know why it's not liking my credentials, but let me just go ahead and try logging in here again. All right, I don't know why it's not liking this. I apologize for that. I'll just go ahead and add a new one. All right, so then now I want to set up an email, and I'll just use my email, Sperling@ellipsesolutions.com. And again, you could set these up as parameters that you could pass into it, but in this case, I'm just setting it up as a simple. I'm just hard coding the values in here. I know that's against development rules, but in this case, we're just going to hard code the values. And I'll put just simply your items have arrived, and then you could do purchase order, and then here you now have the option. You could put your purchase order number right inside your subject line if you wanted to. Everybody likes nice formatted. And then here you put down here in your body, you can now specify your items and say, we'll say something different, your goods for purchase order. And then here we'll put our purchase order number again. You can just easily search for whatever you're looking for. Just double click them in there, and you can easily remove them by clicking the exit. You know, have arrived, and then you can say, you can, if you wanted to, you could put the first name in there if it's available. I don't know if it is. I don't know which ones are available, but you can also put like a vendor account. So if you wanted to include the vendor account here, you can include that in here as well. Additional information or something like that, we can include the vendor account, and we'll just stop there and say thanks, you know, and that's about it. And then we can also add parameters here. So if we want to set this up, let's just say this is a important email, and then now we have our setup, and then we can just say it's a high priority, and then we save our workflow. So now at this particular point, our workflow is live. There's nothing here that tells us that. Again, remember, as soon as you make the changes, it is essentially live. So you come in here, you can easily see, I wish I could move that over for you guys, but show more of the screen here, but it gives you a quick summary of what this workflow does. It says when this business event occurs, it's going to process all the data, and then it's going to show you the history down here of the number of runs. So now if we go back into our D365, let's go to our accounts payable. Let's go to all of our purchase orders. Let's hope I had a PO here that's an approved status. So here's one. You know, real fast here. I should probably show you guys this. Remember, under our purchase order, if it's confirmed, when you click here, it auto sets up an endpoint directly into D365 for you. So you can see now we have an inflow. For some reason, it's called a Microsoft Flow endpoint. I don't know why it's like that, but that's just the way it essentially works. And then here's your active events. So because we created this directly into Logic Apps, it went ahead and auto created this relationship for us. So there's nothing that we need to configure here for us, which is very nice. I mean, we could create a custom one and configure this ourselves, but it did it for us. So I wanted to point that out to you. All right, so back to our accounts payable, and then we come down here into our, let's hit back, apologize for that. Go to our accounts payable here. Let's find a PO here that's, I think it was under 1,001. Yeah, there's one. And then we'll click our purchase order. So here we have just a standard 50 units. We'll just go in here, our purchase order, and we'll confirm it. And so our operation is now complete, and you can easily see now that we have a confirmed purchase order journal. So we know that went ahead and posted. So now, remember, inside of Logic Apps, you can still come in here and you see nothing's called it yet. Well, okay, well, there's a batch job that runs under for Logic Apps, and then it's called the business event batch processor. So in this case, I'll go ahead and schedule that so we can get that waiting. And what that will do is now trigger that batch job to send that request directly to Logic Apps, assuming that we've did everything correctly. from past experience, I can say that sometimes, getting the whole process to work can have its challenges. I'm not going to downplay that by any means, but once it's working, it works great. And as more you work with it, the easier it will get. And I will promise you on that one. As you can see, the batch of executing, it's now ended, and hopefully we come in here and turn off. There's part of that frustration. For some reason, it didn't send the request. So, guess I apologize for that one. I don't know exactly why it's not flowing in this case. I don't want to eat up the rest of the meeting time to kind of go over that one, but basically this is how you would set this up, exactly as I have it here, is that you would set up the business event, which we have here when a purchase order is confirmed. This is for this legal entity. Hopefully I was under that legal entity, which I am. And then down here, you could you set up the JSON string that we received, and then here we send an email. I can show you a different example where this worked earlier. If I show you under this one, this does essentially the same type of thing. You can easily see here with history where it's running, and it shows you your data as it flows through the workflow. So in this case, you can see this case when the business event occurred, it shows you all the data. And the advantage of this one, when you view the history of everything, it shows you the data as it's going through your model here. Okay, that is very important. So you can shows you the data. So if you think something's wrong, you can easily look at your data and see what decision it's making. And then as it's put down here, it just parses the JSON. So here's the content, here's the schema, these are the values that pulled out. And then over here, and it shows you the output. So this, remember, the output's what's sending the next step. It's going to get that record of data. In this case, I set up an extra step, and then it's going to send an email. So as you can see, it's very good at debugging the issues that you're trying to resolve. And I apologize why that one's not working with the sample that we just put together. I can show you a second example here where I set up a demo 2. This one's a little more, that does a little bit more, and I can go through that one with you here as well. Here you can set it up. In this case, this is a little bit more of a different type of scenario. In this case, we want to set up a request. In this case, I want to set up a URL. So I have a website listed up. I want to send it data that gets posted to this web service. Then in this case, I want to send that data back to the web search saying, yeah, I got the data, go ahead and send the value, everything worked okay. And then here I make 2 separate cases. I want to do a lookup inside of D365 to say, does this customer exist? And if it does, don't do anything because I changed the process here. If it does exist, if it doesn't exist, go ahead and create me a new customer. And then in this case, you can see it's using the customer's data entity to go ahead and create that customer. And in this case, all I'm doing is just passing in the first name, last name, the customer ID, the currency code, the customer group, and what company that customer belongs to. But as you can see here, I have a second branch where I wanted to do something else. Because remember earlier I said, well, we could have a redundant system that also needs that data. And in this case, I just set up a quick database and say, inside this customer records table, and this is a serverless SQL that resides on Azure, go ahead and just store me the customer ID, first name, and last name. And the advantage of that is like, all right, now you can see I'm taking one request and I'm updating both systems and keeping everything in sync. So this is another example of some of the flexibility that you can have using Logic Apps. And when you automatically add this HTTP request on here, it auto creates this URL for you. You don't have to worry about managing it. You can route DNS with it later, but this creates it all for you. And then, so if we brought up something along the lines of Fiddler here for an example, and I apologize for the small font. I don't know if it doesn't let me zoom in on this. Hopefully everybody can see that. You can see if I put my data in here and then pass in my data, I can now specify a ID value, and I'll call it 123, and I'll pass in Billy demo, and then I'll call it 10. You know what, just keep it simple, 123. And then my currency code, I'll use US dollars, I'll just customer group 80, and I want to put it in the USMF customer. I can now execute that. And right off the bat, you should get your 200 code back. I mean, I can even do it again just to show you guys. Everything now working. I got my 200 requests back. So now if I go back into my Logic apps here, close out of this, and I refresh my screen, you can see down here at the bottom, I have 2 additional calls, one at 11:50, both of them at 11:53, both of them successful. So in this case, I can bring up my data again directly inside my Logic app, and I can see everything processed. This failed because my customer didn't exist, and then it went down to this next branch down here. And then over here, this shows successful that I went ahead and inserted that record into the table. And then I could check the next record here, the second request that I made. And you can see, remember, I got 200 records back. As I came down here, it showed that the record did exist within D365. So it did not process this step. And automatic, so I had certain business conditions that I could put in there. So I retrieved a record from Dynamics to check for that record, and it didn't exist in the first case. It did exist in the second case, and then it did not. So I was able to skip my step. So that just shows you some of the flexibilities. Again, these are simple examples. Just shows you some of the flexibilities that you can use within side of Logic apps. And if you wanted to test that, if we came down here and looked in our SQL Server, remember I inserted into customer records, you can see my 2 records that I created. Obviously, I don't have any primary keys or anything configured, but you can see that the 2 records got inserted into the table. Likewise, I could come into my instance of AX, and if I come down here into my accounts receivable and I want to look at all my customers, you can see that new customer was created right here, BS123, Billy Demo 123. So it did all that for me directly, keeping both of my 2 systems in sync that I needed. I know I'm starting to run low on time here, so I will go on here, and this is just what the second demonstration showed you. There are a few limitations, and with there are, apologize here. There are a few limitations with Logic apps. Again, you can't have more than 500 workflows, or you can't have more than 500 actions within your workflow. These may changes. I don't need to go in all these details here. My favorite one is 500 days, as you could set up on your recursion. There are basically costs. Remember, every action costs, these all cost fractions of a penny. But remember, every time that trigger fires, it costs X amount of dollars, or X amount of cents. Every time that action executes, it costs X amount of cents. So be very mindful of how you create your workflows, because every step that it does costs X amount of cents. And it might seem like pennies, but if you run through a while loop to check for something every second, you can rack up costs pretty quick. So when you do your design, that's very important to keep that in cost. And again, there's URLs down here, so you can link directly to the information. Basic alternatives, obviously, if you have on-premise, you can use Microsoft or MuleSoft. There's other cloud services you can use. You could use Azure Functions, which is another serverless computing service, but you do more development within that. And then you can also use Microsoft Power Automate, but you don't have some of the debugging capabilities that I'm aware of right now with that you can do within Logic Apps, and I demonstrated some of that for you. With that being said, thank you for listening. I have included my email address down here at the bottom. If there's any of you guys are more than welcome to email me. I'll do my best at answering you. If there's any questions, I guess I'll open the floor.
Okay, yep, got a few questions in the queue. The first one is, can we make our own connector?
Yes, you can make your own connector. That does involve some development. You can even, I don't know if Microsoft still allows it, but last I looked, you could make your own connector and even include it in a marketplace to sell it if you wanted to. But yeah, you can do your own development on your connector.
Okay. And then is there a connector for Dynamics 365 Business Central?
I will have to look that one up. I have not used it myself if one does exist.
Okay. And then is a connector like a full API where you can do lots of different actions?
I'll try to answer that one the best way I can here. I mean, connectors, obviously, there's two parts to each connector. There's a trigger and then there are actions. You know, some connectors may not even have a trigger. They may only have actions that you can essentially do with them, so you can't use them as part of your trigger. Those normally communicate through those services through API communications. There's not, I mean, there's a combination of both, because you can use them for like SQL Server that may or may not use API components, but you could use your connect. I guess I really don't understand. If whoever asked that question, if they can type a follow up on that one, I'm not really
Actually,
understanding.
I can unmute. Christopher, do you want to talk some more about that question about asking about, is a connector like a full API?
Yeah, I was simply asking if it was single purpose built or if a connector had multiple parts like insert a record, update a record, that kind of thing inside of a single connector.
Yes, so those are your actions. So when you develop your connector, you would develop multiple actions within that connector. So if you needed to say insert a record or update a record, you could use the same connector for that. You might have to define it multiple times within your action can only commit one of those two things at a time. You can't tell an action to insert and update, but you could use the same connector to both insert and then use that connector again to update. That connector will handle the connection to do the insert and the update. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And then another question, if you need to copy a large number of Logic apps from one instance to another instance, how do you do that? Please tell me you do not have to manually recreate them all per instance.
Within your Logic apps, down here at the bottom, there is an option that you can click clone, and you can clone your Logic app as well, and basically you'll make an exact copy of it. And within that clone, you can put it in a different resource group or whatever it may be.
Okay, just a couple more questions. What is the main difference between Logic Apps and Power Automate, and why should we use one over the other?
That's a good question. Logic Apps gives you a little bit more. Logic Apps gives you a little bit more capabilities of using things, for debugging that may or may not be available in Power Automate. All the connectors that are available in Logic apps should also be available in Power Automate. A lot of it comes down to, personally, from my standpoint, a lot of it comes down to personal preference and which one you like to use better. Logic apps, you could hand them off to other developers to integrate into Visual Studio. You do have some of those capabilities that you would not have with Power Apps. And I believe the scaling, where it automatically scales, works better with Logic apps over Power Automate, but I don't want to send someone down the wrong direction because I don't know if that changed recently. I know both tools are, Microsoft changed a lot of things with Flow and Power Automate, so I don't want to send the user down the wrong path there. I personally like Logic apps because I can easily manage it from within inside this portal. I can have multiple users in here working on different things. One of the advantages of sometimes the Power Apps is if you have to pay for the user license, that can also increase your costs that way as well. Again, that's my preference. Hopefully that answers the user's question.
Okay, and that was the end of the questions in the queue. So
Okay.
I'm just going to say, yeah, thanks very much, Bill, for presenting, and thanks everyone for attending.
All right, no problem. Hopefully everyone had enjoyed and learned a little something about Logic apps. So